On a street of neat lawns and trimmed hedges, Mary's garden buzzed with bees, bloomed in wild color, and whispered something ancient. The wind smelled like honeysuckle that morning. It danced lightly through the porch screens and rustled the edges of the folded HOA newsletter resting beside Mary's teacup. She rocked gently in her chair, a familiar rhythm that had once matched her husband's beside her, now matched only by the slow creak of the old wood. The tea was chamomile steeped long enough to cool slightly, the way she liked it. She leaned forward and adjusted a crooked wind chime hanging just above her head. "You always said the wild things had a place," she murmured to no one, the words more memory than statement. Down in the garden, bees hovered lazily between spikes of purple bee balm. Milkweed stood tall, not prim but proud, and a pair of goldfinches bounced from branch to branch in the overgrown pear tree near the fence. Fallen logs purposefully placed lined one edge of the path and served as shelter for the critters Mary had come to know by sight, if not by name. A car rolled by slowly, windows up, clean, the kind of car that made people sit straighter without knowing why. Karen Delancey didn't stop, not right away. Her poodle, Mignonette, sat prim on her lap like an accessory. Karen parked 2 doors down, slipped on her sunglasses, and strolled back toward Mary's property with an air of purposeful casualness. Mary didn't move from her chair. The breeze tugged at the edge of her knit cardigan, worn even in May. Karen stopped just beyond the low picket fence and surveyed the garden the way one might examine a thrift store painting. Curious, but already unimpressed. "It's charming, Mary," Karen said, her voice rising slightly at the end, like the compliment had a question mark. "But you know we do have standards." Mary sipped her tea and smiled. "Some things don't need to meet standards to be beautiful." Karen gave a thin smile in return and moved on, her heels tapping smartly against the pavement. Mary watched her go, then turned back to her garden as if the conversation had been about the weather. By noon, the air was warm and still. Mr. Albright appeared at the side gate with a small paper bag in hand. "Brought over some of that banana bread," he said, voice rough like gravel. "Baked it too long. You'll need strong teeth." Mary chuckled and waved him up the steps. "I'll risk it." He sat on the swing bench while Mary poured him a glass of lemonade from a sweating pitcher. They sat quietly for a time, both watching a hummingbird dart between blossoms with military precision. "She's got her eye on you," Mr. Albright said eventually. When Mary didn't ask who, she just nodded. "She left the HOA newsletter this morning. Something about an upcoming lawn appearance review." Albright snorted. "It used to be dandelions meant wishes, not fines." Mary reached into the wicker basket beside her and pulled out the letter, folded into precise thirds and bearing the HOA's flowery logo in pale green. She opened a drawer in her hallway cabinet and filed it behind 2 others, each stamped with different dates, but the same intent. "Some folks trim hedges, some folks trim freedom," Albright muttered. "That's a bit dramatic," Mary said gently, but didn't disagree. Across the street, in the window of Betty's Cafe, Sophie Delancey sat at a corner table with a cold drink and her phone propped against a sugar jar. She was filming the garden, zooming in on a monarch landing gently on the milkweed. She didn't smile, but her eyes held a thoughtful brightness. Unlike her mother, Sophie wore a T-shirt with grass stains on the sleeve and sneakers with one untied lace. Mary didn't wave. Sophie didn't wave back, but there was a quiet nod of shared acknowledgement, something halfway between curiosity and cautious admiration. The next day came hot and still. The lawnmowers buzzed through the neighborhood in a staggered symphony. Neat lines were carved into bright green yards. Children rode bikes in careful loops, mindful of new flowers or unspoken boundaries. At Mary's place, the path remained uneven, framed by time and low-growing clover. At sunset, Mary returned from watering the columbine near the fence to find something folded and pinned beneath the gate latch. The envelope was cream-colored, thick stock, no stamp, no envelope flap, just her name in tidy cursive. She slipped it from its place and unfolded it carefully. Notice of violation. Dear Mr. Connolly, your property has been reviewed in accordance with Section 8B of the Willow Creek Homeowner Association Lawn Standards Policy. Due to the presence of excessive overgrowth, non-standard plantings, and wildlife-attracting elements, your garden has been deemed out of compliance. You are hereby requested to submit a corrective plan within 10 business days. Failure to comply may result in escalating daily fines beginning at $50.00/day. Beneath the printed form was a sticky note with a smiley face and the words, "Friendly reminder." Mary read the paper twice. Then she folded it neatly, walked inside, and opened the same drawer from before. She slid the letter into the manila folder marked H.O., tucked it behind the others, and closed the drawer with the same care she used to close her garden gate. Outside, the porch fan hummed softly. The scent of lilac drifted on the evening air. Somewhere down the street, a neighbor's screen door banged shut. Mary stepped back outside, picked up her garden gloves from the bench, and held the letter beside them for a moment. She studied both the soft fabric, the clean lines of the paper. Then she opened the folder once more. She doesn't tear it up, she files it. In Willow Creek, you could mow your lawn, trim your hedges, and still lose the fight by letting one wildflower bloom. Mary found the envelope wedged so tightly in the mailbox that she had to tug it free with both hands. It was heavier than usual, thick with printed warnings and policy citations. She held it in one hand while the other clutched her grocery list, a sheet of yellow notepad paper, the corners curled, ink slightly smeared from where she'd rested her wrist. She scanned the bold header, "Official Notice of Fine," and slipped it under her arm without breaking her stride toward the house. At the kitchen table, the letter lay unopened, next to a bowl of pears and 3 seed catalogs stacked beneath a dog-eared copy of Eastern Pollinator Habitats, a backyard guide. Her teacup steamed quietly beside it. The ticking of the wall clock, the gentle hum of the ceiling fan, and the occasional scrape of a chair leg as she repositioned herself were the only sounds filling the room. She finally opened the envelope. Nonconforming vegetation, fine of $150, 0 cents. 10 calendar days to submit a corrective landscaping plan. Additional penalties to accrue thereafter. Mary set the paper down, then reached into the drawer below the bread box. She pulled out a folded letter, edges soft, creases nearly worn through, from her husband's old field bag. She unfolded it slowly. In his looping script were the words she remembered but always wanted to see again. "Plant something today that will shelter something small tomorrow." But she didn't sigh, she didn't curse, she just slid the fine into the folder marked HOA, now beginning to bulge. That evening, while others gathered at the HOA community hall for the quarterly board meeting, Mary pulled out a different folder, this one labeled Garden Notes. She flipped past diagrams, torn pages from magazines, and hand-labeled Polaroids of bloom sequences. Beneath them, a flyer she'd clipped from the public library. "Certify your garden as a wildlife habitat. Help pollinators thrive." She powered on her laptop and waited as the screen lit slowly, like a groggy friend waking from a nap. With each page she read, her brow furrowed, not in frustration, but in focus. Native species, sustainable watering, no pesticides. She had almost all of it already. All she needed was to show it. Across town, in the HOA meeting room with linoleum floors and tired folding chairs, Karen clicked her pen twice before standing. "Standards," she said, surveying the room of mostly nodding heads and one blinking overhead light, "are the roots of community, and roots, like rules, must run deep or everything falls apart." Mr. Langford, seated 2 seats to her right, adjusted his glasses but said nothing. He rarely did. "Letting one person bend the rules weakens the structure," Karen continued. "We must enforce uniformity if we expect pride in Willow Creek to endure." By the time Karen had dismissed the meeting with a crisp thank you, Mary had already bookmarked the certification form on the National Wildlife Federation's website and highlighted 3 eligibility checklists. She closed her laptop, picked up a pencil, and drew a tiny bumblebee beside the date on her calendar. The next morning the sun hung low and syrupy over Betty's diner, which smelled of bacon, syrup, and scorched coffee. The red patio chairs out front wobbled just enough to keep your posture honest. Mary took her usual corner seat near the window, folded her grocery list beside her plate, and smiled as the waitress approached. "You want peach or cherry, hun?" "Cherry," Mary said, "unless the peach is fresh." The waitress winked. "It's canned. Cherry it is." A few minutes later, Sophie appeared at the diner's threshold, brushing her bangs from her face as the door jingled behind her. She carried a reusable tumbler and a canvas tote. Her shirt read, "Be nice," in faded yellow letters. She hesitated, then slid into the seat across from Mary. "I saw your garden," she said. Mary took a slow sip of coffee. "I suspected you had." "It's," Sophie paused, fishing for the right word, "not what I grew up with, but it's alive. My ecology prof would love what you're doing." Mary tilted her head. "You teach out west?" "Colorado State?" Sophie nodded. "He's big on native planting and bee corridors." They spoke for a while, nothing long, nothing deep. Sophie asked about milkweed. Mary mentioned seed libraries. When the waitress came by again, Sophie declined pie but smiled as Mary finished hers with deliberate joy. Back home, a package was waiting on Mary's front steps. It was from Mr. Albright. No note, just a rubber band around a pamphlet titled Zoning and Land Use, Then and Now. The copyright said 1976. Later that night, the light in Mary's office window burned longer than usual. She reviewed aerial maps. She labeled a sketch of her garden. She printed out a list of plants with Latin names, cross-referenced with their nectar values. Then came the sound she'd been waiting for, an email alert blinking in the corner of her screen. Subject: NWF certification. Thank you for your inquiry. We'd be happy to assist your application. Here's the first step. She read the email once, then again, and finally smiled. It wasn't triumph, it wasn't joy, it was steadiness. She turned off the computer, lit a candle near the windowsill, and walked to the hall closet. The drawer labeled Backups hadn't been touched in years. She pulled it open slowly and ran her fingers across the top layer. Old photos of the house before the fence, sketches her husband had done of garden layouts, and a stack of thank you notes from former students. Mary lifted the folder carefully and returned to her desk. Mary opens a drawer labeled Backups and removes a dusty old file. Photos, her husband's sketches, student thank you letters. Mary didn't raise her voice. She raised paperwork. The public library smelled faintly of old pages and fresh carpet glue, an odd but not unpleasant pairing. Mary sat beneath a flickering light bulb at computer terminal 6, her canvas tote at her feet, a small stack of index cards beside the keyboard. On the screen, a blinking cursor waited patiently inside a box labeled. She adjusted her glasses and began typing. Asclepias syriaca, milkweed, then Monarda fistulosa, milk wild bergamot, then Echinacea purpurea, purple coneflower. Outside, summer hummed through the windows. Cicadas chirred in overlapping waves, and through the dusty blinds Mary could just barely see the distant flutter of trees lining Maple Lane. She reached for the next card and entered water source rain barrel with overflow catchment. Then shelter, hollow logs, layered stone, brush pile. 2 rows down, a line asked for visual documentation, photo/video optional. Mary paused. She'd meant to skip that part. But a week earlier she'd seen something that made her reconsider. It had been nearly dusk, and the last of the sunlight filtered through the bee balm. Sophie had crouched near the garden's edge, camera steady in her hands, lips barely moving. People need to see this, she whispered, as a butterfly landed on the wooden sign Mary had staked just days before, certified wildlife habitat pending. And so, sitting there under the hum of institutional lighting, Mary clicked Attach File, selected the link Sophie had emailed her, and hit Upload. That afternoon, back in the kitchen, Mary printed out her full application. 12 pages long, 2 in color. She hole-punched each sheet with care and slid them into a manila folder. She added a handwritten note on a small linen card. My husband would be proud of this. By the front door, Mr. Albright adjusted a faux birdhouse he'd helped install in the lower corner of the fence the day before. The screws were tight, the lens invisible unless you knew to look. A small green light blinked twice, then dimmed. Motion grid, he'd said. Nothing fancy, but it'll catch movement. Mary nodded. That's all we need. Later that week, Karen reappeared during what the HOA called an aesthetic integrity review. Her SUV crawled past the house like a suspicious cat, pausing ever so slightly at Mary's gate. She stepped out, binder in hand, and clicked a retractable pin. Her heels sank slightly into the soft edge of the sidewalk as she examined the garden from 3 angles, jotting notes between glances. Mary stood on the porch with her tea, expression unreadable. Karen didn't wave. She didn't have to. Her presence was always its own announcement. Sophie watched from across the street, seated on a low brick wall in front of the cafe, camera resting on her knee. Karen glanced at her once but said nothing. That night the heat lingered longer than usual. The frogs near the rain barrel croaked rhythmically as katydids filled the spaces in between. Mary watered the late blooms slowly, almost ceremonially. Her straw hat hung on a hook nearby, the brim warped from years of use. Inside, the lights were dim. The application packet sat sealed on the table, address written in blocky print. Sophie sat beside it, scrolling through a half-edited video montage of bees diving into flowers, of Mary gently pressing soil around a stem, of raindrops gathered at the lip of the birdbath. She looks like she wants to eat the garden, Sophie said softly, pressing paws on a still frame of Karen with her nose wrinkled, frowning at a clump of goldenrod. "Let her look," Mary replied. Sophie smirked. "You're kind of a badass, you know." Mary chuckled. "I'm just too old to care what she thinks." The following night, the camera in the birdhouse triggered at 9:42 p.m. It caught Karen stepping lightly over the corner of the fence, her flats brushing against the mulch. She moved quickly, flashlight low, binder tucked beneath her arm. She bent at the milkweed cluster near the gate, gripped the thickest stalk, and yanked. A second tug, snap. She dropped the stalk behind the log border, brushed her hands on her skirt, and crept back out through the shadows. The footage was only 12 seconds long. Mary watched it once, expression unchanged. She inserted the USB drive into her laptop and saved the file as HO_incident_June_22 MPP4. Then she ejected the drive and labeled it with a piece of masking tape, Garden Camera Milkweed. She opened the kitchen drawer and pulled out her calendar. Beneath tomorrow's date she wrote in small, neat script, Mail, NWF Application Packet. She placed the folder next to the outgoing mail, then stood for a long moment in the dark kitchen, listening to the night sounds filtering in through the screen door, chirps, croaks, the distant hum of someone's broken porch light. In the morning, Sophie would help her upload another clip. In the evening, Karen would likely pass by again, but tonight it was quiet. Mary sat down at her desk, peeled the backing from a yellow sticky note, and wrote in firm strokes, Wildlife Habitat, pending. She smoothed it onto the top of her corkboard. Then she took another. This time her handwriting was smaller. Contingency Plan A. The plaque wasn't made of gold, but it might as well have been. Nothing made Karen flinch like a federal seal. Mary unwrapped the padded envelope on her front porch, the crinkle of paper echoing slightly in the still July morning. Inside was a small metal sign, forest green with white lettering, and an embossed emblem of a songbird perched on a milkweed stem. It read, Certified Wildlife Habitat, National Wildlife Federation. Her fingers traced the cool metal as if it might vanish. She carried it carefully to the base of the mailbox and drove it into the earth with the heel of her palm. It fit perfectly between a patch of native sedge and the dusty rose cone flowers she'd planted in early spring. It now stood exactly where the last HOA violation notice had fluttered, tacked by thumbtack to the wooden post. Across the street, a neighbor paused while trimming a hedge and gave a cautious wave. Mary returned it. Inside, she poured herself a glass of lemonade and added 2 sprigs of mint from the planter. Her email inbox pinged once. Sophie had just uploaded a short video called When Nature Wins in Suburbia. The thumbnail showed a monarch butterfly, wings backlit, perched on one of Mary's echinacea blooms. By evening, the video had over 1,000 views. Comments began appearing beneath it. More neighborhoods need this. Who do we contact to certify ours? Looks like that HOA finally met its match. At Betty's Diner the next day, the chalkboard menu read, Today's special, no pesticides, just pickles. Mr. Albright chuckled over his coffee. Think they're talking about your garden or Karen? Mary sipped her iced tea, swirling the mint leaves against the ice. Maybe both. Sophie scrolled through her phone, then looked up. You know your garden's more famous than Mom's bylaw blog now. Mary smiled. I didn't know she had one. Oh, she does. Lots of capital letters and red underlines. In the sterile glare of the HOA boardroom, Karen clutched a printout of Sophie's video like it was a subpoena. She tapped the table sharply. This, she said, pointing to the screen capture of Mary's butterfly garden, is not in keeping with community aesthetics. Mr. Langford, sitting 2 chairs down, adjusted his glasses. It's not in violation either. She's certified now. The designation overrides local restrictions. Karen snapped her pen in two. There needs to be a bylaw, she said, her tone brittle. We can't allow this kind of wildness to spread unchecked. There were murmurs. One board member mentioned optics, another mentioned legal exposure. Karen's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her iced tea. The condensation had pulled into a neat circle on her printed agenda. That evening, just before dusk, Mary stepped out to bring in the mail and noticed something wrong. The sign, her sign, lay splintered at the base of the mailbox. The metal plate was bent at one corner, the wooden post cracked straight through. She knelt slowly. The surrounding plants were trampled, flattened in a wedge-shaped path. No tire tracks, no footprints, just the quiet damage of intention. Mary didn't curse. She didn't yell. She rose, dusted her hands off on her apron, and walked back inside. In the corner of her study, the trail camera blinked red. Motion captured. Time stamped. She loaded the footage onto her laptop. The image was grainy, but the figure was unmistakable. Slacks, blouse, narrow-heeled flats. The camera caught her from behind as she yanked the sign loose, flinched when the wood cracked, then hurried off screen. Mary watched the clip twice. Her expression didn't change. She opened her email, typed slowly but deliberately, attached the video file, and addressed it to herself. Then she added Sophie to the CC field and wrote in the subject line, "In case they ask." They stepped on flowers, but tripped over the law. Mary sat beneath the hum of her rotary fan, the same one she and her husband had installed nearly 30 years ago when they couldn't afford central air but still wanted a breeze. The living room smelled faintly of lemon polish and dry earth. On the coffee table lay a printed series of stills, one frame at a time, Karen stepping over the garden border at 9:47 p.m., her hand reaching for a young sapling, the flash of her heel as she crushed a patch of creeping thyme. Mary had watched the footage once, that was enough. She slipped the stills and the USB drive into a padded envelope, then added a short note scribbled in her familiar looping script, as discussed. Please see attached. She sealed the envelope and slipped it into her canvas tote alongside her reading glasses and a granola bar she knew she wouldn't eat. The sheriff's office smelled like dust and peppermint. The flag above the receptionist's desk drooped slightly, its fringe faded and fraying. Deputy Haynes greeted her at the counter with a polite nod, adjusting the clip on his duty belt. "Miss Conley," he said, gesturing toward the empty bench across from the water cooler. "Let's have a look." Mary handed him the packet. He opened it slowly, examining the photos with a furrowed brow, then inserted the USB drive into his ancient desktop computer. The footage loaded in silence, punctuated only by the distant hiss of the cooling unit. When the clip finished, he leaned back with a sigh. "Well," he said, "this is clear enough." Mary nodded once. "My wife," he added with a sheepish grin, "tried to grow a butterfly bush once, killed it with kindness." "I've seen less action in a police report than your flower bed." She smiled politely, but didn't laugh. "I'd like to file a formal complaint," she said. "This is the second time." "There'll be no problem," he said, reaching for a stack of forms. "We'll issue a written warning. If it happens again, you come straight to me." By the time Mary walked out into the humid August air, the sun had turned the sidewalk into a patchwork of heat mirages and faded chalk art. She adjusted her sun hat and walked home slowly, the town moving around her at its usual unhurried pace. That night, Sophie sat on the back steps of the garden, phone in hand, reviewing the screenshots one by one. "He just walked in like it was hers," she murmured. "She thinks it still is," Mary replied. Without asking, Sophie uploaded 2 of the clearer images to the Willow Creek Neighborhood Network, a local social page known more for bake sale announcements than scandal. She added a short caption, "Documented trespass on private property, garden destroyed, certified by the National Wildlife Federation." Within an hour, the post had been shared a dozen times. By morning, nearly 100 comments had flooded in. "This is unacceptable. Thought the HOA had rules. Guess not for everyone. Looks like someone's finally pushing back." Karen's denial came swiftly, an email blast with the subject line, "Clarification on misleading images." In it, she claimed digital tampering, misunderstanding, and a regrettable coincidence of proximity. No one bought it. At the next HOA meeting, the folding chairs were filled, the air thick with silence and barely suppressed judgment. Karen stood behind the plastic lectern, face tight, hands gripping the sides. "There has been a lot of misinformation circulated this week," she began, her voice steadier than her expression. "We must remember that not everything shared online is accurate." Mr. Langford cleared his throat, then pushed a motion to table Karen's latest proposal, a revised fine structure targeting non-standard vegetation. No one seconded it. Karen stared at the board, her pen snapping clean in two between her fingers. A bead of sweat slid down her temple as she looked across the room and saw 3 neighbors whispering, eyes darting from her to Mary, who sat quietly in the back row, a manila folder on her lap. The vote never happened. Karen stormed out before the meeting ended, her heels echoing like punctuation against the tiled floor. The door slammed behind her, muffling her muttered curse. Outside, Sophie waited near the benches beneath the flagpole. The late afternoon heat made the plastic seat warm beneath her, the metal frame burning against her bare legs. Karen spotted her immediately and stopped short. "I hope you're not enjoying this," she hissed. Sophie looked up, calm but firm. "I don't think I can support you anymore." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She turned sharply and walked toward her car without another word. The sun dipped behind the willow trees lining the road, casting long shadows across the dry grass. A breeze stirred the brittle leaves, carrying with it the scent of lavender, earth, and something else, something sharper. Change. Mary's garden wasn't the only one blooming anymore. Willow Creek had caught the bug. September rolled in softly, with mornings crisp enough for sweaters and porches that smelled faintly of damp soil and cinnamon. The goldenrod near Mary's gate had gone almost feral, spilling over the path in yellow plumes, and the purple asters were coming into their own. A breeze nudged the old wind chime into a soft rattle, and Mary looked up from her weeding as a shriek of laughter echoed from the street. A line of second-graders, plastic shovels in hand, paraded down the sidewalk behind Ms. Truitt, the school's retired art teacher turned substitute gardener. "They've come to see the Queen," Miss Truitt called with a grin, gesturing toward the bee-balm, "and maybe borrow a few seeds, if you're feeling generous." Mary straightened and dusted off her knees. "They can take what they need. Just tell them to thank the bees." The children swarmed the garden like a group of polite tiny tornadoes. Sophie stood off to the side, filming snippets on her phone. Kids crouched beside milkweed pods, others gently tapping soil into the ground around transplanted golden Alexander. "They want to start a butterfly patch by the lunch tables," Miss Truitt said, watching a boy carefully water a sapling with a rinsed-out yogurt cup. "One of them told me, if that lady could do it with just a hose and a smile, so can we." Mary smiled and knelt beside a girl, placing a caterpillar onto a leaf. "Tell them it wasn't just a hose," she whispered. "It was years of stubbornness, too." In the following days, something changed in the neighborhood. The first house to follow was the Thompsons on Willow Bend. They planted sunflowers along their fence line, bright and bobbing like gossiping neighbors. Then came the Baileys, who set up a rain barrel painted with their kids' handprints. One by one, yards shed their conformity like snakeskins, trading trimmed hedges for native blooms and neat rectangles for wandering stone paths. Mr. Albright installed a nesting box near his garage. Miss Truitt planted parsley and fennel for the swallowtails. Even the HOA inbox couldn't keep up. Subject: certification inquiry. Subject: wildlife gardens, guidelines. Subject: can we plant milkweed? Karen's carefully composed sense of order began to splinter. At the next board meeting, her voice trembled, not from fear, but from fury. "This is chaos," she said, waving a printed screenshot of a neighbor's yard full of sunflowers and salvia. "If we don't intervene now, this becomes the new standard." Mr. Langford shifted in his seat, staring at the tabletop like it held better answers. Sophie stood at the back of the room, waiting until Karen's voice gave out. "I think," she said clearly, stepping forward, "that maybe the rules are the problem." The room went still. Someone coughed. Outside, crickets began their early evening chorus. The next day, the HOA board, under pressure from residents, issued a bulletin. Public vote scheduled to evaluate the Uniform Lawn Standard, Saturday, Community Green, noon. Mary baked 2 loaves of pumpkin bread. Sophie painted a sign that read, "Let it grow." Mr. Albright brought his camping chairs. Miss Truitt brewed cider. By late morning, the folding tables were set up beneath the old maple trees at the edge of the neighborhood park. Children chased each other between rows of homemade signs. A small table with apple slices and cinnamon tea sat beside the ballot box. Neighbors arrived in pairs and trios. Some brought lawn chairs, others clipboards. Many carried mason jars filled with wildflowers. For the first time in memory, the community felt less like an association and more like a gathering. Mary stood near the cider, not campaigning, just smiling. Her garden had always spoken for itself. The vote opened at noon. The line stretched across the green. By 2 p.m. it was clear. The Uniform Lawn Standard was repealed. The HOA would now allow individualized, eco-friendly yards across Willow Creek. A cheer rippled through the crowd, soft but sincere. Someone clapped Mary on the shoulder. A child released a monarch butterfly into the air, and it caught the breeze with the kind of grace only earned by transformation. In the back, away from the crowd, Karen sat alone on the deck of the community gazebo, fingers laced tightly in her lap. The folder in front of her remained unopened. As the votes were tallied aloud, she quietly stood. Karen quietly steps down from her chair, her hands shaking just slightly. Karen once said that chaos starts with a dandelion. She was right. It just didn't bloom where she expected it. October settled into Willow Creek with the quiet authority of a grandmother rearranging throw pillows. Brisk, tidy, and unmistakable. The air held the scent of cinnamon and dry leaves. Mary sat on her porch with a crocheted shawl around her shoulders, sipping warm cider from a clay mug. A squirrel darted across the yard, paused at the base of her mailbox, and buried an acorn with methodical precision. "They always know where to invest for the future," she murmured, smiling into her cup. Across town the air was colder. Though the thermostat in Karen's kitchen read 72, she stood alone at her spotless countertop, flipping through a folder labeled HOA Restoration Proposal. The pages inside had neat margins, carefully formatted charts, and at the very back, 3 signatures. The names of board members, including Mr. Langford, appeared in ink. She had traced them slowly from old minutes, her hand steady but heart racing. There was no vote, not yet, but she planned to present it at the upcoming emergency session. She told herself it wasn't fraud, it was preservation. Sophie found the folder by accident, if accidents existed in houses that neat. She'd returned for a charger and found the papers lying too perfectly atop a manila envelope on the dining room table. She flipped through them, then flipped back. Her eyes narrowed. When she showed the papers to Monsieur Langford the next day at the café, he turned pale beneath the glow of the table lamp. "I never signed this," he said, his voice cracking like dry twigs. "And Karen knows that." They sat in silence for a long while. At the next community meeting, the rec hall was warmer than usual, filled with bodies and quiet murmurings. Folding chairs creaked beneath cardigans and flannel. The smell of pumpkin cookies mingled with old coffee. Karen stood at the front, her proposal in hand, already mid-sentence. "And to re-establish clarity, I move we reinstate prior standards under an amended policy for seasonal adjustments." Sophie stood from the back row. She held up the packet and spoke, her voice clear. "Before you vote, I think everyone deserves to see how this proposal was assembled." She passed copies to the board members one by one, highlighting the forged signatures. Murmurs turned to gasps. Mr. Langford buried his face in his hands. Karen stood frozen at the podium. "I just needed order," she said finally, her voice brittle. "After the divorce, after the house felt empty, I needed something stable." No one replied. The board called an immediate vote. Karen was placed on administrative suspension pending review. She stepped down from the podium and walked back to her seat, staring straight ahead. After the meeting, Sophie and Mary walked slowly through the crisp evening air. Leaves crunched beneath their shoes, the neighborhood glowed with porch lights and carved pumpkins. "I used to think she was protecting us," Sophie said, her voice cracking slightly. Mary didn't say anything. She just looped her arm through Sophie's and squeezed gently. The next morning, just after sunrise, Mr. Allwright whistled softly as he swept his porch, humming a war song that had no words anyone remembered. Across the street, Karen stood beside her mailbox. She reached out with both hands, pulled the small metal nameplate from the post, and tucked it into her coat pocket. Then she walked inside without looking back. One spring later, the weeds still grew wild, and so did the people. The morning of the Willow Creek Spring Fair began with the low hum of lawn chairs unfolding and the clink of pie tins settling onto plastic tables. Bunting strung from mailbox to tree fluttered lazily in the breeze, and Mary's garden, still gloriously untamed, buzzed with bees, birdsong, and neighbors trailing toddlers through drifts of golden coreopsis. At the front gate a wooden sign read, "Certified Wildlife Habitat, HOA free since 2023. Below it a smooth gray stone rested in a bed of yarrow, carved in neat letters, "She Let It Grow." Mary stood just beside it, arms tucked inside a soft cardigan, watching as schoolchildren skipped down the new stepping-stone path. Each stone bore a name or drawing etched into its face. Olivia, age 6, A.B., Jonas, a cloud, Lucy, a snail, and a sun. She opened her husband's old garden notebook, worn soft at the spine. A photo of them sat tucked inside the front cover, taken long ago in front of a younger version of this very garden. Beneath it, his handwriting read, "If I'm gone, and you're still planting, that means we won." Mary smiled, closed the cover gently, and slipped the book back into her tote. All around her, gardens had changed. Where once there were clipped lawns and identical edging, now stood bursts of wild fennel, backyard trellises made of old ladders, and one particularly bold neighbor's gnome-tended rock garden shaped like a turtle. Rain barrels gleamed in the sun, porch planters overflowed with daisies, basil, and marigolds. At the center of it all was a long table shaded by a red canopy. Labeled jars of seeds, milkweed, coneflower, goldenrod stood beside slices of rhubarb pie and mason jars filled with cold, sweet tea. A sign said, "Take what you'll tend." Sophie stood behind the table in a shirt that read Pollinator Club, ST 2023, laughing as she helped a group of children pot small plants in painted cans. The kids wore paper wings and antennae made from pipe cleaners and headbands. One boy declared he was now officially a bee. Perry Alderman manned the cider station, humming a slow banjo melody between refills and occasionally wiping his brow with an old red kerchief. "They said I'd never play again after the shoulder surgery," he said to anyone who passed by, "but turns out the bees don't mind a little off-key." The old HO was gone, replaced by a community-run beautification council that offered support instead of sanctions. It had no authority, no fines, no fear. Just volunteers, some coffee, and a shared spreadsheet. Karen's house had sold in February. The new family had painted the front door lavender and planted daisies along the walk. They'd brought a strawberry pie to the fair and asked if anyone wanted to join them for a backyard bonfire later. Near the raised beds, Mary crouched to check a patch of creeping time that had started inching toward the stepping stones. Before she could stand, a small hand tugged at her sleeve. It belonged to a girl no older than 6, freckles across her nose, dirt under her nails. "Miss Mary," she asked shyly, "can you help me make mine wild too?" Mary's eyes crinkled. "Of course," she said, easing herself down to sit beside the girl. "You just need sunlight, time, and a little kindness." The two of them sat in the dirt together, heads bowed over a small pot and a packet of seeds. Behind them, the fair carried on, laughter, banjo twangs, a gentle breeze tugging at streamers strung across the hedges. The monarch butterfly glided down from somewhere high above and landed gently on the girl's open hand. She froze, eyes wide with awe. Mary placed her hand softly on the girl's shoulder. The garden hummed. Life went on. 1 year after the garden first stood its ground, Willow Creek had grown into something far wilder and far wiser than anyone expected. Where once conformity ruled, now color bloomed in every yard, and laughter replaced the hush of fear.
What began as one woman's quiet resistance became a shared awakening. A reminder that rules, when wielded without heart, can choke the very beauty they claim to protect. But when people stand together, firm, rooted, and kind, they can turn the tide with nothing more than sunlight and resolve. Perhaps the real seed of change was never a flower, but a neighbor who dared to let it grow.